welcome to Into the Terminal, where we dive in. And today we're going to be talking about troubleshooting once you've implemented all of those security protocols that we've been talking about over the last few weeks. Welcome, Nate.
Are you implying that security makes things more difficult?
I mean, any amount of complexity makes things more difficult. The question is it worth it or not? And I think that mostly we say yes.
I would think mostly yes. Yeah, I used to have a sticker on the back of my car that said "Security is inconvenient."
You are not wrong. So Nate, you're going to captain our critical path today.
Yeah. So I've been watching Into the Terminal, and it was recommended that I apply a SCAP policy because you got to be secure and all that stuff, right? So I started working through the CIS benchmark on my machine here, and just everything's broken now. I have this job; it runs from cron. It's just not working, right? So Scott, what do I have to do to try to figure out? Here, I'm going to just show you my error message here. So my super important program is right here. If you can see where I've got highlighted. It's literally important program.sh. So that's how you know it's important, right? Because it's named and it's running out of temp because where else would you put your important programs, right?
So my first question is, when you were applying your changes for the CIS benchmark, did you just download and execute some random Ansible stuff that we provided?
I mean, isn't that the way you're supposed to do this?
With no idea of what it actually does?
I mean, it's got to be more secure, right? The boss said it has to be secure, so I made it secure, and now all my stuff doesn't work.
All right. Well, I guess the first thing I'd do would be like, well, we know that it's related to your application of security policy, but just like in general, I would want to do things like inspect the permissions on this file.
Right. So right here in the log, it says permission denied. But Scott, I can assure you this worked this morning, right? This worked before. I didn't change anything. Well, except this Ansible script that I ran. So let's go to temp. And there's my important program. You can see that it is clearly executable and readable, pretty much to the world, because security is important.
Right. Well, my next question is, why are you storing this important program in temp, a place for temporary things?
Well, that's just where it's always been, Scott.
I see.
Sorry, I'm laying it on thick here.
So one of the things that typically happens when we are complying with security policies is we want to make sure that we know what executables are around on the system.
Right.
And there's specific directories where we expect them to be, right? Like bin or use bin.
Right. So it's I'm playing dumb here, right? But it's you shouldn't be running stuff out of temp. I did this on purpose because one of the rules in the CIS benchmark would break things running out of temp. Now, there's reasons maybe you'd run things out of temp. There's also this exact same issue could apply to other policies. The CIS benchmark isn't one of them, where you remove the executable flag from the mount for temp and in some of them for home, right? CIS said temp, and that's why I used temp as an example, because CIS is the one I wanted to pick on. But sure enough, if you look at my FS tab, here's temp. I've removed executable. Now, this is important, right, for security, because if things run out of temp, this is a pretty common attack vector for bad guys, right? Temp is usually world writable because it's supposed to be. This is a place where you're supposed to be able to throw temporary things. So bad guys know that if they find a way to get through, say, your website or whatever, some way to remotely place a file, they'll usually target temp because they know that's where it can go. They'll also target your home directory because if they've got a user, they've got a home directory in most cases. So turning off the ability to execute anything on that partition, anything on that mount, is the goal here. No, so, yeah, that's exactly what I did.
You also mentioned that CIS does not target home, but other security policies do target home.
Yeah.
And so I know, for example, the disastig is one of those, because we don't want people bringing their own executables. Right? We want them to use
Right.
the ones that were provided by the system and installed by the systems administrator.
Right.
Another one that is often targeted is var, because var also has a world writable directory underneath of it. var temp.
Var temp. Yeah. So here we'll fix this by moving important program to var temp, which I didn't make no exec. And then we'll just fix the path here. And now we're fixed, right, Scott?
Make me have sadness today.
No, obviously that's not the right solution. The right solution is to find a better place for your application that it's not, and it shouldn't be world writable either.
Yeah, now it is important to note also that cron tabs are also stored in var, but they're stored in var spool cron. And so if you had to support your own local cron tabs, you might separate that out, and that way you could mount it with different options. My other question, Nate, so while we can't directly execute my important program, could we bash important program?
Theoretically, now I've already moved it. Here, let's copy it back. Okay, so if I did, there we go. Performing important businessy things. Totally works now.
Right, because what we're really doing is we're calling the bash executable out of user bin, which is allowed to be executed,
Right.
and then we're passing it as an argument this parameter. So I bet you could also change your cron tab to do a bash temp important program thing, and then it would work.
Yeah,
But,
another way to work around the security measures.
yeah, but that only works because it's a bash or an
Yeah.
interpreted language, right? And we're calling a different executable to do the interpretation that is permitted.
Right.
If it was
If this
actually
was
like
just a standard binary here, right? If I copied ls or something over here, I don't think you'd be able to make that work.
right. And again, we don't want people to drag along their own implementations of programs, right? We want them to use the programs in our secured environments that are provided by the administrator through trusted repositories and whatnot.
Right. Which I think we're going to touch on later.
Yeah.
Trusted repositories.
So stay with us after the transition, because we're going to be covering a few additional things of like, oh, you secured your thing and now it doesn't work. Let's figure out why and why that's actually important to the security policy. So stay with us, everyone. How's it going, Nate?
Thanks, Scott. You totally saved my job. Total, like the boss is no longer yelling at me because the important businessy things aren't working.
Your boss is the worst.
Those important businessy things.
Exactly. Now is the time of the show where if you are watching live, feel free to interact with us via the chat. If you're watching deferred, please leave us a comment if you want us to answer your questions or provide us some feedback, because we do actually pay attention to those and respond.
Got some fun chat already. We got some people already called that FS tab, so good job. Someone said serves you right for using Ansible.
I mean, any technology sufficiently advanced is equitable to magic if you don't understand it.
Indeed, indeed.
All right. So before the break, we talked about the importance of installing trusted software. And that's something else that a lot of the security policies will want you to enforce. So I've got this box, and it is a RHEL system, and I had configured it with the extra packages for Enterprise Linux repository. Right, so I just wrote some files here to allow me to install those packages. Right, so there's my extra packages for enterprise Linux, and you can see that it's referencing the right repositories. But the darndest thing, Nate, when I try to install a super awesome package like the Moon Buggy game,
Moonbuggy is important.
it is. Everyone loves a text-based Moon Patrol. Whoops. Actually, that won't work, will it? Hold on.
You broke it.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. What happens when you go out of order, Nate?
Scott's future demo broke his current demo. So there were some comments in the chat about security guys telling you how to circumvent security. Well, it's important to think about how to circumvent security in order to be secure. So, take that.
Well, and part of it is also like understanding why someone is choosing to put these things into place, right? Like the fact that you want to have Noexec mounted is so that people can't execute stuff. But if people are putting in shell scripts or Python programs where the interpreter for those are stored in other directories, then mounting it with Noexec didn't have any effect, right?
Yeah, now in the case of that shell script, of course, it does call bin bash, but because the shell script existed in temp, running it directly didn't work, but calling bin bash separately did work. So yes, it's important to think about that kind of thing.
Right. So there's like the letter of the law for security and the spirit of the law for security.
Right.
And that's where we complied with the letter, or we had the no exec mount option, but we didn't really comply with the spirit, which is keeping people from running stuff out of temp that they had downloaded there.
Right. And I don't know if there's another rule in the CIS benchmark that would have prevented that, because I didn't go that far. I didn't apply every rule I found. I applied a couple, right? But it's important to think about, yes, you're compliant, but that doesn't mean you can just rest on your laurels and say, I'm secure now, because there's always people trying to think up ways to get around your security.
Yeah. And so to answer that question, there is another technology that ships with RHEL called application allow listing.
Mm-hmm.
And the technical implementation is through a daemon called FA policy D.
Yep.
And so that you can actually specify what executables and what command lines people can run.
Indeed.
So that have stymied our workaround for Noexec.
Yep. And app allow listing is a thing that the security industry has been using to basically make the need for antivirus gone, right? If you have strict app allow listing policies, you can almost eliminate the idea that viruses are commonplace, right? I don't recommend running without it, but there's a lot of people in the security industry that are suggesting that, right? Execution policies instead of antivirus.
All right, so I unbroke my broken demo.
Yay!
See it in full effect of not working correctly as I would expect. So you recall from previously, before we were interrupted by brokenness, I was trying to install this package from the extra packages for enterprise Linux repository. And you could see that it was able to go out and download it, right? It's right here in the,
Yep.
Right there. So I was able to access it, but then I got this error message at the bottom. Nate, can you tell me about this error message and why I'm receiving it?
So let's see here. The error message is GPG check failed. All right. We talked about this. I forget which episode it was in, but we talked about secure, signed packages from your OS vendor. Right now, obviously, EPEL isn't necessarily from your vendor. It's an extra repository that you would have installed on this machine. So it's not just a subscription that you attached to your RHEL machine, right? A lot of these, there's two ways to run an extra repository. One is with GPG checks disabled, and the other with them enabled. So what that gets you is the GPG check says there's a signature. Sorry, I hit the mic there. There's a signature for your package that's derived from that GPG key, right? And if the signature cannot match or does not match the key, or if the key is not installed, then you'll get the error that you just got. And the idea here is if there was a supply chain problem where the package that was signed by the distributor somehow got changed before it got to your machine, that won't match anymore. right? I've never actually seen that happen, but it could happen, right? If someone gives you an RPM, says, "Oh yeah, this came from Apple," or somehow somebody changed it in flight, or honestly, if it got corrupted, right? This may not be malicious at all. It could be that the download went sideways and you missed some bits, and now it doesn't match anymore, right? So, Scott, are you doing GPG checks? It looks like you are.
I am. It's right there, Nate. GPG check equals 1.
Right. So, do you actually have the GPG key installed and trusted on your system within RPM?
Huh. So I know I have the key installed. Oop. Try that again. So if I look in Etsy, PKI, GPG, RPM GPG, all right, there's the key. I got it.
There's the key, but does RPM know about it? Don't you have to
Oh.
import it into RPM?
Oh, interesting. Well, I could look. Let me make this a little bit more exact. So these are the keys I've got. And maybe if I then wrap this in a quick for loop.
Getting all kinds
All
of
right.
fancy here.
I know. It's craziness. All right. So there's my first one. It is Rapture Automatic Signing Key. That's not extra packages for Enterprise Linux. And there's the next one. That's from the same people. And there's the next one from Linux. So those are Google signing keys. And this is from localhost, also a Google signing key. And here's one for my Google Cloud packages. Oh, by the way, did you notice that this machine runs in Google Cloud Platform?
Weird.
And then here's one from Red Hat.
Oh, that's good. We need that one.
Yep. And there's the
Another
secondary key.
one. Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
good. And that's it.
And that's it. All right. So the file exists, but I guess you could just tell the repository, couldn't you, where the key is?
Yeah. In fact,
Instead of going through all this complicated stuff, right?
so if I had installed the repository from the RPM instead of like making it myself, it would instead look like this and would have this GPG key specification that
There you
matches
go.
that file stored locally on my machine. And then if I do my installation of Moonbuggy, right here, because I answered yes to all questions, it just did it. But it imports the key onto my RPM keyring, and then was successfully able to install the software, right? So now if I run Moonbuggy, there's my text-based video game. So not only are we enforcing that packages have to be signed with a GPG key, but we've actually told it what the acceptable GPG keys are. So if I was to get a package from RPM Fusion, which is not a repository I have configured on the machine, or just randomly download one off the internet, because what could possibly go wrong there? I will not be able to install that package because I don't have the matching accepted GPG signature. Right, that's my supply chain verification that this is coming from someone I know and trust.
Aren't you going to play Moonbuggy?
I mean, I should. You do have to play it too.
I mean, you downloaded it. All right, so yeah, yet another security measure that you may not have had in place. Now, it's really, really, really easy to have the GPG key in place. Most repositories come with them. If you install them in the proper manner, following their instructions, you never even have to think about this, right? This is, I don't want to say it's a contrived example. It is an example of something that used to be a bigger problem than it is today. Red Hat repositories, you never have to think about that key because it comes automatically. And most third-party repositories are going to come with that key. It's not really a thing that you need to worry about. So, but if you see that issue, you could also see it if you have, say, your own custom repository in satellite and didn't provide a GPG key, right? Because I've been over that bridge a few times.
Yeah, and
Or honestly, if you're just trying to install software that's not signed, period, right? Like custom RPMs or whatever.
and another place where I see this, especially in places where they value supply chain security. So they may end up using their own GPG signatures.
Mm-hmm.
So there is an option for RPM to re-sign a package using a different key. So you can download it somewhere or build it yourself, and then you can apply your signature onto it to say, I validate and trust this package. And then you can manage your own key infrastructure for checking it.
Or if you're in a situation where you have software that you have to repackage for automation purposes, right? Like you may take an RPM that's provided by a vendor, add your own configuration to it, and rebuild the RPM. Then it loses a signature. You have to then re-sign it. And then you do that using what Scott just recommended.
Yeah, and I've successfully rebroken my machine in the expected way for our next demo.
Oh, good, good. So I rambled for long enough about keys. Good.
All right. So the other thing that is often the case in security policies is they want you to separate all these different file systems.
Mm-hmm.
We saw one of those reasons earlier in the critical path with Nate. So Nate, why, just refresh our memory, why did we separate those file systems for the critical path?
So in that case, adding Noexec is a mount option, and if it's not its own file system, then you can't mount it separately. I mean, I shouldn't say can't. I guess there's ways you could do that, but generally, what you'd want is a separate file system, so you can add that mount option. There's lots of other reasons to have separate file systems, but that's one of them.
Yeah, and another reason that we have separate file systems is what we're about to experience. So I'm going to go ahead. I've installed Apache on this machine. And I'm trying to start it up, and I get this error message. And let's take a closer look at what is complaining about here.
Let's see here. Oh, it's totally a certificate problem. Look, it says it right there.
Yeah,
Right, Scott?
sure does. And if I actually looked, it's correct. Like it's having problems accessing that file because it does not, in fact, exist. But the bigger problem is actually something different. The reason that file doesn't exist is because when I started Apache for the first time, it tried to create that localhost certificate, but it couldn't do that because the slash file system was full. And because the slash file system was full, couldn't create the certificate needed, which caused the Apache web server from being able to successfully start.
Right, right. And this could happen with lots of other reasons why it would need to create any file, which we unwittingly saw with your DNF command from earlier.
That's right, right? I couldn't install software because we couldn't actually download the RPM packages from the repository anymore because we didn't have enough file system space to store it. So having a full file system can impact a whole bunch of system activities, and it might even give you weird errors like this that don't actually to the problem. Right?
There are some things that act very strangely when the file system is full. And in fact, the full file system can lead to data corruption if something like, say, your SQL database was on that partition, right? So this is definitely the sort of thing you want to monitor for and make sure you get ahead of before it occurs.
Yeah, and so a lot of the file systems will be asked to be separated in a whole bunch of different security policies, right? So CIS benchmark, DISASTIG, Australian Essential 8. It's all going to be ones where we know that there can be additional people or processes writing to it. So var temp, because var logs is one thing, but var temp is another thing. Home, and there's a whole bunch more. That's one where if you are doing the installation of your system, if you tell it that you want your installation to comply with the security policy, it'll actually like outline all the separate file systems you need and verify that they're there. So in this case, we just have a really big log file in var log. You see right there, big log.
It's even named big log. That's really convenient.
Yeah, I mean, it's for the big log service.
Oh, okay, good. It's the service that just writes big log files.
Exactly. So if I was to remove this very large log file, right now we're good, right? Back down to
Yay.
% usage. And if I start up Apache, everything will be happy. Right, so we're all good now. But that brings up another point, like, great, we separate out all the file systems. So we don't affect things unintentionally by having one fill up. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
There's some other things that we can do to try and control the size of logs.
So there's a couple things. First of all, you could put log on its own mount point. So if it does fill it up, it's only affecting the logs. Now that in itself is a problem, because if you don't have log data, then if a bad guy tries to break in and do something, or if simply a service fails for some other reason, you don't have historical data as to what happened there. So you want to take that into consideration. One of the ways to do that is by using a log rotation scheme, using log rotate, right? With compression and with rotation and something that actually expires old logs.
Yeah, so we actually ship this thing called log rotate that's configured by default. By default, it runs weekly. We actually call it as a daily cron job, and we will keep 4 weeks worth of log data. And every week we rotate the logs, we just put an extra number on the end of the log, and then after 5 weeks, the oldest one gets thrown away. There's a include statement down here about including another directory. So we can also ship specific log rotation parameters for services. So if you're building your own RPMs with your own software, you can actually drop a how should logs be controlled by default with that service. So you can do things like, oh, well, this one needs to be done daily, or it should only be rotated if the log is above a certain size. So we shouldn't unnecessarily rotate things if we don't need to. So there's a whole bunch of options there to control how you manage those logs. I know a bunch of places that I've been on site have said things like, well, we don't want to keep 4 weeks of logs. We need to keep 2 years of logs, right? So then you like just crank up the rotation number, or you can rotate less frequently. Like there's a whole bunch of things that you can do there to try and keep those logs for longer. Another option would be to use rsyslog to ship those logs off to somewhere else. So you can still rotate on the local machine and get rid of them and lose their file storage because they're actually stored somewhere else on another machine on your network.
Just make sure that doesn't fill up too.
Well, clearly.
Logs are a great way to fill up a disk, to be honest. So if you don't have rotation in place, it will eventually fill your disk. How much log data goes through your services and how much you're running and how verbose you have those logs will dictate how quickly it fills them up. So yeah, keeping them on a separate machine is a really good way to make sure that you don't lose data in the event of some kind of an audit, right? I've been involved in legal discoveries where it's like, we need log data from 8 months ago when this report came in. Can you make sure you have that preserved somewhere? It's like, well, if you're rotating monthly or weekly and keeping a month's worth, you don't have the data. And that's an okay answer as long as you have a policy that says this is our log policy. It says, nope, we're not going to have it longer than that. But if you're in an industry that dictates how long you have to keep it, you got to think about how you're going to store that log data. And it can't just be on the server. It's got to be archived somewhere. Otherwise, you're going to be wasting a ton of space and it's going to be impossible to find the stuff if someone comes and asks for it.
So Nate, we have one last broken thing to fix.
We do. We do. All right, so we need my terminal first, don't we?
Oh, yes, we do. 1 second.
Hold on.
Sorry.
There, I got it. Oh, we did it again. You do it. You hit the button.
What happens when you don't have a dedicated producer? Everyone's
Too many cooks in the kitchen. All right, so we're back on my server here. I have a little website that runs on this thing. Now, I don't want to switch screen shares, but I'll try to do this with curl. Before I started to implement my security policies, this totally displayed like a really important website. And now, again, this is hard to see, but what I'm getting here is the default Apache page that comes out of the box when you install Apache from the Red Hat repositories. So my website's still there. The permissions look okay, but I don't know why I'm getting this page that is obviously not my website. So what we can do here is back to our logs, right? You can look at the error log, and it's telling us right here, access denied to index.html in /web/index.html. Now that's exactly where my website's supposed to live. Because Scott, that's always where I put it. I mean, I don't know where else you'd put a website, right? /web sounds like the perfect place for a website, doesn't it?
I mean, clearly it says permissions, right? It's denied access. That's totally permissions.
Right. So first, I guess we'll look at the directory, right? It's owned by Apache. It's got read, write, and execute on the directory, which, by the way, if you don't have execute on a directory, that'll bite you sometimes. So keep that in mind. I don't know why that is exactly, but executable means you can actually browse to the directory. And inside of there, we just have my index file, and that looks okay too. It's owned by Apache. Maybe it shouldn't be writable by Apache, but that shouldn't stop it from working, right? It's readable. It's there. It's totally like valid HTML, super important business site.
I see that you have super important business. Does that go with your very important business cron job?
Yeah. Scott, I work in a very important industry. All right, so the files are all there. What? Sorry, go ahead. Talked over you.
If it's not a permissions thing, then what did you do recently to this machine, Nate?
Well, I applied security. Duh.
See, and everyone always guesses, and I see it's in the chat, Mr. Rick Green, SELinux. Everybody always says it's SELinux's fault.
So Rick is in fact correct. All right, and I love this particular issue because it bit me so many times when we first started to implement SELinux in my prior job. We had a fleet of RHEL 6 boxes. No, we had RHEL 5. We were moving to RHEL 6, and we decided that as we moved to RHEL 6, we're going to set SELinux to enforcing. We're going to bite that bullet. We're going to make it work. And I spent, I don't know, a year and a half fighting this problem. Every time we moved a thing to RHEL 6, it was, yep, SELinux is broken again. All right, so the fix here is simple. Let me just get it out of my notes here so I don't typo it. We're going to fix the contexts on the web directory here. Now, another way to fix this would be to put your website in a more reasonable place. var www HTML is where Apache expects you, at least Apache on RHEL, expects you to have your website. If you put it underneath there, there's a ton of pre-made contexts in the policy that say, if it's in this directory, it's probably a website. All you have to do is make sure that the context get applied when you put the file in there. And to be honest, when I was trying to break this on RHEL 9, it seems like that's a lot easier. It used to be if you copied a file in and it didn't have the right context, it would stay broken. It seems like on RHEL 9, that's not the case. At least that was my experience yesterday trying to break this, because that was what I first tried. I just tried to copy it in place.
So more importantly, yesterday when we were setting this up, and Nate was having his broken thing still work and was very frustrated by that.
Yeah, I tried to break it. It still worked.
Right. He put it in the user directory.
No,
if I remember.
opt.
Oh,
He
opt.
was in opt. Yeah.
And so um, the policy rules for Apache have access to other types of files. So, for example, Apache needs to be able to look at things in the etc directory, like its configuration file. It needs to be able to write logs in the var directory. So, this is the file context that you're adding a file context for web because currently it's set
Right.
as like system T or something.
Yeah, well, I'd have to scroll back now. I cleared the screen because people were complaining they couldn't read it. It was unconfined object R default T.
Yeah. But so just because you have it somewhere that Apache doesn't normally store content doesn't necessarily mean that Apache processes aren't given access to
Right.
that place,
Yep.
right? Because they may have
Yep.
legitimate reasons to access that place on their own, like etc or var.
Right.
Or
Now we could
apparently
delve
opt.
into or apparently opt. We could delve into SELinux policy, but I'll simply say that there are policies written inside of etc. I think it's etc SELinux policies, to be honest, that tell SELinux different directory paths, what contexts those should be set to, right? So if you put your stuff in the right place and you do a restore con, which I'll show you in a second, you shouldn't have to worry about setting the context, which is what I'm doing here. So SE manage, seminage, I've heard it said, whatever. People love to mispronounce things that are on the command line. SE manage can set the context for any file wherever it is, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm using SE manage to add the HTTPD syscontent T type to the /web directory. Now, this format here, this single quote /web open paren /dot close paren question mark. I think I need another quote at the end, don't I? That basically tells it to recursively do all the files inside of web. So it'll do web and everything inside of it. That's hard to remember. I once had a guy in Red Hat training refer to that as the pirate syntax because it looks like a pirate because he's missing an eye and he's got a hook. So that's how I remember it now. And then it's always like, wait, is it a / or a \? Where was the star? Right. So, but at least it's easier to imagine that as a pirate's face with a hook. So
And
anyway,
it's actually a regular expression where
it
the
is.
question mark applies to everything in the parentheses. So you could have the stuff in the parentheses or not. And if you do have the stuff in the parentheses, it's slash followed by anything.
Right. All right. So that this will write it to those files. I don't know why it's taking a minute. Give it a minute here. Sometimes I have what?
Because it's updating the policy.
Right, but it's usually very fast. I've been having some weird slowdowns in my home lab that I haven't tracked down. I think that was part of why it took a little while. So that updates the policy, but does not change the context, or at least didn't used to. Nope, still doesn't. See, it's still default T. To do that, we do restore con, which says take the policy and apply it to the directory that the policy should be applied to. So con -v is verbose. I forget what F is. R is recursive. Did I get that backwards? It's VFR. Web. Okay, and this will go through and tell us what it's changing. I think F is force and R is recursive. So now it should all have the right context. Keep forgetting the Z. -Z is usually the command line argument for things that want to show SELinux information. So now you see it's got HTTP syscontent T, and we shouldn't even need to reload the service or anything. We should be able to. Now we've got my super important website back. I can do super important business again. So yeah.
Business.
Yes, SELinux policies, SELinux contexts, SELinux anything. If you're not used to working with SELinux, will bite you over and over and over again. And it gets easier and easier with every release of RHEL, but it's a thing you just have to be aware of, right? I think we've done a previous episode of Into the Terminal about SELinux, have we?
We did. And we also featured something very similar to this on one of our troubleshooting episodes, because everyone always blames SELinux. And you know what? A lot of times it's not, but sometimes it is. So
Right.
I need to have
Right.
a shirt that says, like, it's not SELinux. It can't be
Wait, maybe it
SELinux.
is.
It was not SELinux.
Yeah, right. Like the old DNS haiku. It's not DNS. It can't be DNS. It was DNS.
Well, that takes us off the end of our discussion topics today and our demos. So thank
Yep.
you for tuning in to see some like things you need to be aware of before you start randomly assigning security things to your system.
Don't be like Nate.
Next week, we will be covering logical volume management, which will be interesting because I will be breaking out the whiteboard. Scary.
Man, as long as it's not a slide deck.
And is that the rule? No slides?
Well, it used to be the rule. I think it's been broken a few times, but generally.
And then we'll do a couple of kind of ad hoc episodes the next few weeks. And then we haven't quite decided what our next arc of content should be yet. So that'll be coming. But for the next few weeks, we'll do kind of like catch as catch can topics and have some fun.
Yeah, should be a good time. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching. This has been fun.
We'll see you next week.
My server now.
Bye, everybody.